Early one morning, as John returned to his car after grocery shopping, he stumbled upon a heart-wrenching sight. A small, frail cat with its front paws missing, meowing pitifully. The poor creature, despite its clear suffering, nuzzled against John's leg, purring softly. Unable to leave the poor cat behind, John scooped it up and rushed it to the nearest veterinary clinic, where a startling discovery awaited him. "Is there a vet available to check this cat?" John asked the receptionist while holding the cat in front of him. He could see the shock on her face as she looked at the legless cat dangling in front of her. "I'll see what I can do," she responded as she got up and walked into one of the treatment rooms. John's heart pounded as he held the cat in his arms, looking at a growling dog across the room. "He's not very fond of cats," the owner awkwardly chuckled. No shit, John thought, but he didn't say it out loud. Instead, he smiled sheepishly and turned his back to the dog, hoping it wouldn't start barking and scaring the cat. A little while later, the receptionist returned, saying John could go into examine room 2. As he stepped inside and the vet saw the cat in his arms, he knew something was wrong. "You need to call 911 immediately," the vet said, after taking a better look at the cat. But how did the cat lose its front legs? Was it just a random street cat? And why did the police have to get involved? If anyone in the world should have run into this cat, it should have been John. He was the kind of person who watched reels about animals being rescued almost every day and truly felt better about them. So it was without a doubt that he simply had to help the cat when he first spotted it in the parking lot. "Hi, little buddy," John whispered softly, looking around him to see if there was a possible owner nearby. The cat walked on its hind legs over to John and began to rub against his leg while purring, truly warming and breaking his heart at the same time. John knew he could never leave the cat behind now that they had bonded and scooped it right off the ground. He put the cat on the passenger seat and loaded his groceries in the back before stepping behind the wheel. "What do I do with you?" he muttered as he petted the cat's head. Although its legs looked healed, John noticed that the cat was still in a lot of discomfort. Something wasn't right. He felt it in his guts. He had no plans that day. Well, he was supposed to mow the lawn, but that could wait. So he looked up the closest veterinarian clinic in town and drove over there, hoping they could mean something to the poor cat. He hated seeing it in pain, even though he had just met it. He just hoped its injuries were treatable and not too bad. 20 minutes from here." "That's not that bad," John said to the cat, and he drove away. He had no carrier, so the cat was trying not to fall off the seat the whole way, making John chuckle occasionally. He knew he shouldn't be laughing at the cat, but it was just too cute and silly not to, and the cat wouldn't even understand him, he hoped. When he arrived at the vet, he was relieved to see not many cars in the parking lot. He chose a spot near the front door and simply carried the cat inside in his arms. The receptionist didn't even look up at John when he arrived, as she was so busy on her computer. So, John cleared his throat and held the cat up in front of her. "Is there a vet available to check this cat?" John asked the receptionist a bit jokily. The receptionist finally looked up and her eyes widened at the sight of the cat. She confusedly looked from John's smile to the cat and back, probably wondering why he was so cheerful, but that was just how John was, wanting to make light of a sad situation. "Let me check for you," said the receptionist as she scurried off, leaving John in the bustling waiting room filled with pets and their worried owners. John stood there, the cat cradled in his arms, feeling the curious stares of the room. He tightened his grip on the cat, whispering reassuring words to keep it calm amidst the canine chatter and parrot squawks around them. John's gaze landed on the growling dog from earlier. Not one to shy away, he approached slowly, speaking in hushed, soothing tones. "Hey there, big guy, no need to fuss," he murmured as he extended a cautious hand towards the dog. The animal's growls subsided slightly under John's gentle touch, its ears flicking back as it sniffed his hand. The dog's owner, noticing John's efforts, chuckled and joined in to help. "Let's distract this grumpy old fellow," he suggested, pulling out a well-worn tennis ball. Together, they managed to divert the dog's attention, tossing the ball down the hallway. The tension seemed to drain from the room as the dog scampered after the ball, tail wagging. Just as the atmosphere lightened, the receptionist returned, her expression a mix of professionalism and concern. She hesitated a moment before addressing John. "The vet will see you now," she said, her voice carrying a subtle undertone of urgency. John nodded, tightening his resolve as he prepared to follow her to the unknowns of examination room 2. She led the way, her steps quick and purposeful. "Right this way, please," the receptionist directed, guiding John through a series of sterile-smelling hallways until they reached the door marked Examination Room 2. She paused, gesturing for John to enter. "The vet's waiting inside," she added, with a glance at the cat that seemed to say more than her words could convey. In the sterile exam room, the vet wasted no time, carefully examining the cat's unique injuries. As he moved his hands over the sleek fur, his brow furrowed deeply. "I've seen this before," he murmured more to himself than to John. He glanced at the cat and then back at his records, comparing notes that hinted at a chilling similarity to another case he had encountered. The vet's hands paused over the cat as his eyes darkened. "These markings? They're identical," he said, pointing to almost imperceptible signs on the cat's skin. His voice grew heavy with concern. "It's not a coincidence," he continued, the grave tone in his voice signaling the severity of the findings. John watched, heart sinking, as the implications began to dawn on him. "We need to act fast," the vet asserted, locking eyes with John. "I've seen these symptoms before. We should get the police involved right away." The urgency in his voice prompted John to swallow hard, his mind racing to keep up with the unfolding events. The vet reached for the phone with a decisive hand, his actions firm and resolute. "This isn't the first time," the vet explained as he waited for the call to connect. "We've found other animals, similar conditions, all within this area." John's confusion mounted with each detail, his eyes widening in disbelief. How could something like this happen here, in his quiet town? The room seemed to close in around him as he absorbed the shocking news. As they waited for the police to arrive, tension hung thick in the air. The vet paced slightly, casting anxious glances at the door while John sat by the cat, stroking its fur in an attempt to offer some comfort. Neither spoke much. The gravity of the situation had left them lost in their own thoughts, each pondering the implications of what was unfolding before them. The clinic door swung open briskly as a police officer stepped in, clipboard in hand, ready to take charge. His sharp eyes scanned the room before settling on John and the vet. "I got a call about a situation here," he stated more than asked, his tone professional but approachable. He nodded to John, indicating it was time to delve into what had happened. "So, tell me everything from the start," the officer urged, pen poised over his clipboard. John recounted the morning's events, describing how he found the cat and the peculiar state it was in. The officer's pen flew across the page, capturing every detail, the location, the cat's condition, and John's immediate actions. "And you brought it straight here?" he confirmed, looking up from his notes. The officer leaned in to examine the cat more closely, his expression turning to curiosity. "No front paws, you said?" he muttered, gently lifting the cat's limbs for a better look. He noted the clean cuts, unusual yet not unheard of in his line of work. "Seen a few cases like this?" he commented under his breath, which only piqued John's interest further. "We've seen similar cases around," the officer admitted, as he straightened up, his face serious. "There's a pattern, but I can't share everything," he added, locking eyes with John. This hint of secrecy stirred a mix of frustration and intrigue in John. The officer's deliberate vagueness suggested that the situation was bigger than just an injured animal. Before stepping out, the officer turned back to John, his demeanor stern yet concerned. "Look, I know this might stir up a lot of questions, but I advise against digging deeper on your own." "It's not safe," he warned. John nodded, understanding the gravity of the warning, but inside, a strong resolve was forming to uncover the truth, no matter the risk. As the officer outlined the dangers of probing further, John's mind raced. The more he was told to step back, the stronger his need to step forward became. "I understand the risks," he said, meeting the officer's stern look with a determined gaze of his own. Inside, a relentless curiosity churned. He couldn't just let it go, not when there might be others like this helpless cat out there. "This isn't just happening here, it's wider," the officer explained, referencing several similar incidents under investigation. His voice was low, laden with a seriousness that chilled the air around them. Each case, he noted, was as bizarre and unresolved as the next, weaving a complex web that seemed just out of reach for John. The shared information only fueled John's desire to dig deeper into the mystery. Despite the clear warnings, John felt his resolve hardening. He looked down at the cat, its eyes meeting his with a mix of innocence and pain. "I can't just walk away," he whispered to the cat, feeling a heavy weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. This wasn't just about curiosity. It was about doing what he felt was right, no matter the danger. The officer's parting words were firm. "Leave this to the professionals, John. You're not equipped for what you might find." As he left, his warning echoed in the now quiet room. John stood there, a mix of fear and adrenaline coursing through him. He knew the officer was right, but something deep inside him whispered that he was the one who had to pursue this. Once alone, John's thoughts raced. The officer's warnings intended to deter him had the opposite effect. He couldn't just stand by. The mystery was too deep, the stakes too high. With each passing moment, the need to uncover the truth grew stronger. He knew it was dangerous, maybe even foolish, but he couldn't shake off the feeling that he had to know more. As John pushed open the door to leave the exam room, he collided with a sprightly elderly man. "Oh, my apologies," the man exclaimed, steadying himself with a laugh. He overheard the last part of John's conversation, and his eyes twinkled with curiosity. "Sounds like you've got quite the mystery on your hands," he remarked, introducing himself as Dr. Miles, a retired veterinarian with a penchant for unsolved animal cases. Dr. Miles's interest was palpable as he examined the cat, his experienced eyes quickly assessing the situation. "I've seen many injuries in my time, but this is peculiar," he mused, running his fingers thoughtfully along the cat's healed wounds. "These injuries are no accident, and they're certainly not natural," he added, looking up at John with a mix of concern and intrigue sparking in his eyes. Over a quick cup of coffee in the clinic's break room, Dr. Miles shared his theories about the injuries. He spoke of similar cases from his past, ones that had never been fully explained or solved. His conviction and enthusiasm were contagious. By the time they'd finished their coffee, John was nodding in agreement. "We should look into this together," Dr. Miles proposed, and John found himself readily agreeing. Ignoring the stern warnings from the police officer, John and Dr. Miles huddled over a map of the area, marking spots where similar incidents had been reported. "We'll need to tread carefully," Dr. Miles advised, his voice low and serious. "But I believe we can uncover more if we follow these leads." Together, they planned a discreet visit to local animal shelters, starting with the one where the most recent cases had been reported. Their first destination was a modest animal shelter on the outskirts of town. As they approached, the shelter's sign, weathered and welcoming, swung lightly in the breeze. "Let's see if they've noticed anything unusual lately," John suggested, his voice a mix of hope and determination. Dr. Miles nodded in agreement, his keen eyes scanning the building as they walked towards the entrance, ready to gather any clues they could find. Inside the shelter, John and Dr. Miles were all ears as staff recounted tales of animals brought in with bizarre injuries. Each story added a piece to the puzzle, with notes piling up in John's notebook. The most striking detail was a recurring mention of a certain wooded area nearby, apparently a hotspot for these mysterious occurrences. Both men exchanged looks, their curiosity deepening with each new piece of information. One staff member hesitated before sharing, "There's a zone in the woods. It's almost like a Bermuda Triangle for animals here." The description of pets disappearing or returning injured from that specific area sent chills down their spines. Dr. Miles scribbled furiously on a map, circling the mentioned zone. "There's something there, I'm sure of it," he muttered, more to himself than to John. With a map sprawled on the table, John and Dr. Miles marked each reported incident, connecting dots that seemed random but formed a pattern centering around the forested zone. "Look at this cluster," John pointed out, his finger tracing lines between the incidents. Dr. Miles nodded, his eyes reflecting a mix of excitement and concern. "We're on to something," he acknowledged, his mind racing with possibilities. The decision was unanimous and immediate. "We need to check out that zone," Dr. Miles declared, his voice firm with resolve. John agreed, feeling a mix of anticipation and apprehension. They planned their venture carefully, aware of the potential risks, but driven by an overwhelming need to uncover the truth behind the strange animal injuries. Before leaving, John and Dr. Miles assured the concerned shelter staff that they would share any significant findings. "We'll be careful and we'll keep you updated," John promised, offering a reassuring smile. The staff nodded, their expressions a mix of worry and gratitude. With a final check of their equipment, the duo left, ready to face whatever secrets the mysterious zone held. "This is it," John whispered, clutching a camera as they edged into the shadowy woods. Dr. Miles nodded, scanning the dark with his night vision goggles. "Let's set up here first," he suggested, pointing to a thick oak. The forest hummed quietly around them, the crunch of leaves underfoot breaking the silence as they positioned their first camera to face down a narrow trail. John clicked a camera into place on a high branch covering an open clearing. "Think this will catch something?" he asked, stepping back to check the angle. Dr. Miles looked over his shoulder. "If anything weird happens, it'll happen there," he assured him, flashing a grin in the dim light. They moved stealthily to the next location, setting each camera to capture the unseen. Suddenly, a beam of light sliced through the darkness. "Down!" Dr. Miles hissed, pulling John to the ground. They lay still as the ranger's footsteps crunched nearby. After a tense minute, the light swung away and the footsteps faded. John exhaled slowly. "That was close," he murmured, his heart pounding against the forest floor. "Too close," Dr. Miles agreed, peeking cautiously before they continued their mission. Back in their hidden spot, Dr. Miles fired up the laptop. "All cameras are live now," he announced, settling in beside John to watch. They squinted at the small screen, where the first shadows of night creatures flickered. "Come on, show us something good," John muttered, his voice a mix of nerves and excitement. Dr. Miles nodded, his finger ready at the keyboard to mark any significant movement. First sightings. The screen flickered with movement. "There! What's that?" John pointed as a shadow darted across one of the monitors. "Just a raccoon," Dr. Miles chuckled, adjusting the focus. Another camera caught a deer pausing, its ears twitched nervously before bounding away. "It's starting," John breathed out, his eyes wide with anticipation. They watched, spellbound as the forest nightlife began to unveil its secrets, one frame at a time. Shutterstock.com/SkyNarvin. John and Dr. Miles leaned closer to the monitors, their eyes tracking every movement. "Look at that fox," Dr. Miles pointed out, as an animal skittered nervously around the edge of an abandoned site. "It's like they're scared of something there." John nodded, rewinding the footage to confirm the erratic patterns of behavior they'd seen. "Something's definitely off about that place," he murmured, his brow furrowed in concern. The next clips were even more telling. A deer limped into frame, paused at the edge of the clearing, then turned and fled. "Did you see that?" John asked, shock colouring his tone. "It's like they know to stay away." Dr. Miles agreed, noting each incident. And that limp. It wasn't natural. Something hurt these animals. The mystery deepened with each observation, compelling them to keep watching. The cameras also captured areas of dead vegetation and stagnant pools that animals deliberately avoided. "That's not normal," Dr. Miles commented, zooming in on a patch of blackened grass. "No animal has gone near that water," John observed, pointing to a small pond that reflected the moonlight ominously. "This isn't just about the animals. There's something toxic here," Dr. Miles concluded, his voice heavy with realization. Throughout the night, each camera feed revealed more unsettling images. One showed a raccoon with unnaturally matted fur, while another captured a bird that seemed to tremble uncontrollably. "Mutations, maybe," John speculated, a grim tone to his voice. "Or poisoning," Dr. Miles added grimly. They watched as more animals appeared, each exhibiting unusual symptoms that pointed to a larger, more sinister issue. Convinced they were onto something significant, John and Dr. Miles began planning their next move. "We need to see the site by daylight," John decided, his voice firm with resolve. "There might be clues we can't see at night." Dr. Miles nodded in agreement, already listing what they would need for the daylight investigation. "Whatever's happening, it's centered there. We'll get to the bottom of this," he promised. As the sun climbed, John and Dr. Miles trudged through the overgrown industrial site. Pushing aside thick underbrush, they stumbled upon rusted chemical containers, half buried in the dirt. "Look at this," John said, pointing to faded labels peeling off the barrels. "These haven't been touched in years." Dr. Miles took photos, documenting each discovery. The silence between them grew heavy as the evidence of negligence unfolded before their eyes. The further they explored, the clearer it became that this place was once a bustling chemical plant. Old structures stood like skeletons, draped in vines and moss. "This must have been massive," Dr. Miles remarked, scanning the dilapidated buildings. They found old paperwork fluttering in the breeze, schematics of plant operations that hinted at the scale of activities once conducted here, now just ghostly remnants of a forgotten era. Navigating through a particularly dense thicket, they found a cluster of barrels, some tipped over with their contents seeping into the soil. "These are definitely leaking," observed Dr. Miles, examining the dark sludge. "It's soaking right into the ground." John knelt down, his hand hesitating above the contaminated earth. "This has been happening for a long time," he said grimly, anger flaring in his eyes at the carelessness. Using their makeshift field kit, John and Dr. Miles collected soil and water samples near the barrels. Back at their vehicle, they tested the samples with portable equipment. "These levels are off the charts," Dr. Miles announced, showing John the readout displaying high concentrations of toxic substances. "No wonder we're seeing mutations." "This stuff is potent enough to alter DNA," he explained, his voice tinged with frustration. Their findings painted a grim picture. Chemical waste from the abandoned plant was clearly impacting local wildlife. "It's all coming together," John said, looking over the maps and photos spread across the hood of their truck. "These chemicals are the reason those animals were hurting." Dr. Miles nodded in agreement, his face set in determination. "We've got to expose this, John. It's the only way to prevent further damage," he asserted, folding up the map. The lab results came back with a verdict that chilled the air between them. "It's confirmed," Dr. Miles said, holding up the report. "The cat's genetic makeup has been altered by the chemicals. It's a clear mutation from exposure." John absorbed the words, a mix of relief and horror mingling in his mind. "So, it wasn't cruelty, but chemicals," he murmured, glancing at the cat who purred obliviously by his side. "These mutations aren't common," Dr. Miles explained as they walked through the lab. "It shows just how severe the chemical impact is on the environment." His words echoed off the sterile walls, underscoring the gravity of their discovery. "It's not just animals. It could affect anything that comes into contact with the area," he continued, his voice laced with concern as he adjusted his glasses, looking worriedly at the results again. Armed with their conclusive evidence, John and Dr. Miles drafted a detailed report and contacted the environmental authorities. "We've got solid proof of hazardous contamination," John stated firmly on the phone, passing sheets of data to Dr. Miles, who nodded in agreement. "It's urgent that we act quickly," he added, his voice firm and persuasive. They exchanged a look of determination, knowing the real work was just beginning. The knowledge that the cat's condition stemmed from chemical exposure, not deliberate harm, brought John a profound sense of relief. "At least it wasn't someone out there hurting these animals," he said to Dr. Miles, who was busy organizing their findings. "True, but this is a wake-up call," Dr. Miles replied, his tone serious. "We need to ensure this doesn't happen again." John nodded, feeling a renewed commitment to their cause. With the mystery resolved, John and Dr. Miles turned their attention to the broader issue. "We need to get the word out," John declared, starting a social media campaign about the contamination. Dr. Miles worked on connections with environmental groups to support their cleanup efforts. "It's about making a lasting difference now," Dr. Miles said, looking over the buzzing phone. "This site needs to be cleaned up for the sake of all," he asserted, his eyes steely with resolve. With the cleanup underway, John made a heartwarming decision. "I'm adopting him, and his name is Hero," he told Dr. Miles with a smile as they watched the cat nuzzle against his leg. It wasn't just a name, it was a tribute to everything they had uncovered together. Hero had unwittingly led them to a much larger truth, and now he was going to be a permanent part of John's life. John spent the weekend transforming a corner of his living room into Hero's personal space. He set up a cozy bed, toys, and even a little climbing structure near the window. "There, you'll have the best view," John chuckled as Hero curiously inspected his new digs. Ensuring everything was just right, John felt a profound sense of responsibility and joy, knowing Hero would never have to fend for himself again. Every few weeks, John and Dr. Miles returned to the site, now bustling with cleanup crews and environmentalists. "Look at them go," John noted, taking photos for their ongoing record of the site's transformation. "It's really happening, Miles. We did this," he said, with a sense of accomplishment. They watched as contaminated soil was removed, replaced by fresh earth, a tangible sign of healing and hope. Back at home, Hero thrived, adapting quickly to his new environment. His resilience became a daily inspiration for John, who often shared updates and advocacy messages online. "Every little step counts," John would say in his posts, showing Hero playfully chasing a ball or lounging in his favourite spot. The cat's story resonated with many, sparking conversations about environmental responsibility and animal welfare. The local community centre buzzed with excitement as residents gathered to celebrate John and Hero. "Your efforts have truly made a difference," the community leader announced, presenting them with a plaque. Applause filled the room as John held Hero up slightly, the cat looking around curiously at the crowd. "It's all thanks to Hero here," John said, his voice filled with pride and gratitude. "He's the real hero of this story."